So how do you take a tiny, swampy island with literally no natural resources, surrounded by neighbors who aren't exactly friendly, and turn it into one of the wealthiest nations on Earth in just one generation? I mean, it sounds completely impossible, right? Well, this is the story of how they did it. This is the story of Singapore.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1965, and for the brand new nation of Singapore, the future isn't looking bright. In fact, it looks a lot more like a death sentence.
You're looking at a quote from the moment Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, went on TV to announce independence. And he broke down. He cried. But get this, these weren't tears of joy. He was crying because he genuinely believed Singapore was doomed. He thought it had just been condemned to fail. And look, you can't blame him. Just think about the situation they were in. No resources, not even enough fresh water to drink. Unemployment was through the roof. They were surrounded by much larger, suspicious neighbors. They had no army to defend themselves, and the country was still recovering from violent race riots. By any logical measure, Singapore's chances of survival were basically zero.
So how on earth did they get into this mess? To really understand the sheer desperation of 1965, we need to rewind the clock just a little bit.
For more than 100 years, Singapore was just a strategic British trading post. But that whole identity was shattered in World War II, when the Japanese just walked in and captured what was supposed to be an impenetrable fortress. After the war, the British came back, but let's be real, their power was gone. Singapore felt way too small to survive on its own, so in 1963 it merged with its neighbor to form Malaysia. This was supposed to be the answer to all their problems. Instead, it was a complete disaster.
The thing is, the Union was a mess from the start. It was full of deep political and racial tension. The Malaysian government wanted policies that favored the ethnic Malay majority, but Lee Kuan Yew fought for a Malaysian Malaysia where everyone was treated equally. Things got so bad that after just 2 years, Malaysia's parliament voted unanimously to kick Singapore out. They were literally forced into an independence they never, ever wanted.
So, facing a crisis that could have totally wiped them out, Lee Kuan Yew and his team did something incredible. They didn't just put out one fire at a time. No, they developed this radical, all-encompassing master plan to solve all of their problems at the same time.
First things first, the most basic need for survival: water. Singapore had to import its water from Malaysia, the same country that just kicked them out. This was a massive vulnerability. So what do?
Now, this is what's so amazing about their approach. They didn't just pick one solution. They did everything. They literally turned the entire island into a giant water catchment area, building reservoirs everywhere, and even making it law that rooftops had to collect rainwater. On top of that, they poured money into brand new technology to turn the salty sea that surrounded them into fresh, clean drinking water. Okay, next up, the economy. Back in the 60s, the standard advice for a new country was self-sufficiency. Put up trade barriers, protect your own industries. Lee Kuan Yew looked at that and basically said, that's insane for us. We have nothing to protect. So he did the complete opposite. He threw the doors wide open. He declared Singapore open for business to the entire world, inviting in foreign companies with low taxes, a promise of zero corruption, and a stable rule of law. His goal was to make Singapore the essential bridge between the East and the West.
At the time, most Singaporeans lived in crowded, filthy slums. And you can't build a prosperous nation if your people don't even have a decent place to call home. The government's solution to this was, honestly, one of its most brilliant and lasting ideas.
So here's the genius of it. The government built huge blocks of public housing apartments called HDB flats. But, and this is the crucial part, they didn't just rent them out. They set up a mandatory savings fund for every single worker. And then, they allowed people to use that saved money to buy their apartment. This was a masterstroke. It didn't just put a roof over people's heads, it gave every single citizen a real financial stake in the success and stability of their new country. It also intentionally mixed different ethnic groups in the same buildings to help forge a single, unified identity.
And the results? Just staggering. Within a single generation, the slums were basically gone. Over 80% of the population owned their own home in a clean, safe public housing development. It's an unbelievable achievement, really. This quote right here really gets to the heart of their mindset. People were constantly telling them, that's impossible, you can't do that. And Lee's government they refused to listen. They were driven by this ruthless pragmatism. They cared about one thing above all else: results. But buildings and pipes are only part of the story. With no natural resources, no oil, no timber, nothing, Lee knew Singapore's only real asset was its people. So they invested like crazy in education. English was made the common language of business, which helped unite the diverse population. But students also had to learn their mother tongue to keep their cultural roots. And to solve the "we have no army" problem, they made 2 years of military service mandatory for all men.
And this was the core of their defense strategy. They knew Singapore could never win a war against its bigger neighbors with brute force. So the goal was to become what Lee called a poison shrimp, to build a military so well-trained and well-armed that any potential attacker would look at them and decide that the cost of invading was just way too high.
Okay, so this incredible transformation sounds amazing, right? But it didn't come for free. The Singapore success story has a really complex and, for many, a controversial side. To get all that order and stability, Singapore's leaders made a very clear and deliberate trade-off. See, Lee Kuan Yew argued that Western-style democracy, with its focus on individual freedom and noisy debate, just wasn't right for a fragile, multiracial society like Singapore. Instead, he promoted what he called Asian values, prioritizing the good of the community, social harmony, and stability over the rights of the individual. And this wasn't just talk. This philosophy led to some very, very strict rules. Some are kind of famous, like the ban on chewing gum, but it goes way deeper. The government keeps a tight grip on the media. Crimes like vandalism can be punished by caning, and for decades, any real political opposition has been systematically shut down.
This quote lays out Lee's justification as clearly as possible. Whenever critics from the West would point to a lack of freedom, his response was basically to point at Singapore's clean streets, low crime rates, and booming economy. For him, the choice was obvious, and he believed most people, deep down, would agree with him.
And you know what? The economic results of this approach, they are undeniable. The impossible nation didn't just survive, it thrived beyond anyone's wildest imagination. But today, it's facing a whole new set of challenges.
I mean, just look at this chart. In a single generation, Singapore went from third world to first. By the 21st century, its GDP per capita, the average income per person, had shot past not only its former colonial ruler, Great Britain, but even the United States. It's an absolute economic miracle. But the very model that created all this success is now facing new tests. Singapore has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and its population is aging fast. The cost of living is sky high. And in the age of the internet, can the government really maintain that same level of tight social control? The huge question now is, what comes next, now that the founding generation is gone? And really, this brings us to the fundamental question at the very heart of Singapore's story. It's a question that countries and people all over the world are wrestling with today. Singapore made its choice, and in return, it created a miracle. But the debate over the price they paid, well, that continues. What do you think?